It's just my talk involves a little bit of listening to some music, and that could be interesting for you. As you've already learned from Peter, I'm not a rock guy. In fact, I'm precisely the opposite. And I'm well aware that contemporary classical music is not always people's cup of tea. But I encourage you to listen to this with thinking about what the subject matter is. Don't get too worried about whether you can follow the tune. And hopefully it'll make some sense to you by the end of it. So I'm going to explain this rather enigmatic title, Tuning This Curious Harp, in a minute. That comes up later. But what I'm talking about is composing music for the observed experience of illness, because I'm obviously the observer in that situation. Use this. That doesn't look very onerous. Right, so just a little bit of background. Actually, again, Peter has sort of given a bit of this away, in that I did have an unusual childhood. Actually, I went away to school at 9, not 12, Peter, and that involved going to Cambridge to sing. And that dominated my life for a long time. There's a picture of, you probably can't see it actually, but I'm, where am I? There in the middle. There's another better picture there. I thought I'd include, this is Ros, my sister, and myself in my school uniform. My poor sister had to come and visit me on a 2-weekly basis for years. Travelling across, they were living in Guildford at the time, so travelling across from Cambridge was a major to Cambridge was over excellent. But there we are in, that's a fuller picture of me in what looks like a pretty ridiculous uniform, doesn't it? Top hat and stuff. That was what I had to wear to go to chapel. But it's not quite as ridiculous as this, which is a picture of my father when he was a chorister at the Chapel Royal in London in the 1930s. So it was in the family, and actually in a way it was always inevitable that I would end up singing. My mother is a wonderful, still does actually, but she has a beautiful singing voice, and indeed my parents met in the Liverpool Philharmonic Choir. That's my pedigree from the point of view of singing and music. I thought I'd show you this picture, which is quite interesting. It's a picture of, again, I don't know whether you can see me, but I'm third boy from the left. Now we are practicing to do a televised version of the coronation anthems, written by Handel. You may have all heard them. The most famous one, of course, is Zadok the Priest. And I actually selected this photograph to show you. Then by some extraordinary coincidence, last week, the BBC released a recording of this as part of their 60th, this is BBC 2's 60th celebrations. So I thought I would actually show you a bit of it. Let's just hope this works. And I'm not sure I press the button now. That's me conducting the same piece 50-something years later. That's my choir, you've heard about them already. I thought you'd just like to see a little bit of them. So, when I went on to secondary school in Canterbury, and I was fortunate enough there to be taught composition by a composer called Alan Ridout. He taught me about 3 years. And actually, to be honest with you, doing medicine or doing music was a big decision for me. But the type of musician I wanted to be really was a composer. So three or 4 years ago, perhaps longer, I thought what I should do is to revisit this whole thing and go back to thinking about composition, music. And I approached Michael Z. Gordon on the right. Michael is Professor of Composition at Birmingham University. So I wrote to him out of the blue, sending him a few examples of my work, and said, would he be willing to consider me as a student? I didn't have a music degree, of course, so this was something of a risk for him. But he agreed to meet, and we had a nice conversation. And in the end, he said, "Okay, I'll take you on." And so I set myself up to do a master's degree, a research master's degree in music composition. And Michael's was a fantastic support in that, and it's been a very wonderful experience for me. Of course, I had to choose a subject matter for my thesis. And so I said to him, well, I'd like to write music that addresses I put observed experience of illness, because I've actually been very lucky in my life. I've not had much illness myself. And of course, what I've been is a great an observer of illness over the years. And that led to me a challenge. How would I try and combine the art of composing with all the techniques and stuff that you have to think about doing that, with my own experiences of doing some science and clinical work in terms of observing people with chronic kidney disease. But I decided that's what I wanted to do, and lots of discussions ensued. And actually, I came down with the idea that there's something I could exploit here, because music itself, if you think about it, is a very embodied language. I'll try and persuade you of that in a second. And illness is really about disembodiment. Somehow I thought if I could perhaps try to bring those two things together and exploit them as an idea for writing some music, and I'll explain that in a minute. This is actually a quotation from a woman called Harp. You probably know her, Edwina. She's a philosopher who's written a lot about the phenomenology of illness. And she writes a lot about this being to do with disembodiment, getting gradually, as you get iller, you lose aspects of your life. Another guy's written about it being disappearance. You're disappearing from the world. He actually adopts this term disappearance, DYS appearance, which is play on words on a medical term that we use to describe any abnormality, dis. And this last quotation is from Harry Kyle. Illness is a limit case of embodied experience. It pushes disembodiment to the extreme by creating a distancing effect what it is to be human. But also paradoxically, it sometimes and often does result in an opportunity for re-evaluation and growth. I'm not going to go through this, but there's lots and lots of scientific evidence to show that actually music is a really embodied process. And what I've just done in this table is to think about the type of musically evoked mental representations we have of music on the left-hand side, and the psychological, biological, and social functions that it has. Anything from states of arousal, synchronization, entrainment. Mimesis is a big topic in cognitive psychology and music. The idea that when you're listening to music, you're often anticipating what's going to come next, and that is part of a reward system. You're listening, for example, for the music to go where you know it goes, particularly if it's familiar music to you. And then there's a lot of evidence that music is important related to theory of mind and empathy. That, for example, the empathy is associated with music. And some people believe that these are the main reasons why music is so important for our species. There's a lot of debate, why are we musicians? Just about all of us are, actually. Very, very few people don't get something out of music. There's no other animal on the planet that has anything like it. They can't beat time, they can't listen to music and enjoy it. My cats hate music. If I walk around the house singing, they leave the room. There might be other reasons for that, of course. So how was I going to do this? What tools was I going to use? Well, I came down in favour of three. The idea of blended metaphor, the idea of using an illness narrative approach, and also I was very keen to get reported experience from patients in there somehow. I had to get something coming from patients. So I'm going to play with three short pieces of music during the course of the next few minutes, in which sort of illustrate those three things in some detail. Just a brief thing, what is blended metaphor? Well, maybe you've heard about metaphor theory from Lakoff and Johnson, they're big in this, but the idea here is that it's a way of combining ideas from two or more different sources. So, for example, you might combine poetry with music, or as in a song. Here is an example of it being done in graphic art. And again, I'm grateful to my son for putting me in the graphic art area. He's an expert on this sort of stuff. Visual metaphor and embodiment of graphic illness narratives. So this is an example of what I mean. So there you see the depiction on the left side of depression, in which somebody is behind the bars there, enclosed, captured, but they also have this, every moment feels as if it goes on forever. This is, on the right-hand side, is a guy with Parkinson's disease, who's actually, his main job in life is to be an artist and draw, and you can see here the stabbing pain that he gets when he tries to draw because he gets muscle spasms. So that gives you an idea. You're taking ideas, metaphors from two different areas, and trying to bring them together and create a piece of art from that. I took this very seriously. I draw great big matrices up for putting examples, but the one I want to focus on, just to give an illustration, comes from the title of this talk, and that is the idea that it fits rather well, the idea that actually ill health can be, detuning can be a metaphor for ill health. In fact, if I spoke to somebody walking in the street in the 1600s, and bumped into someone and they said, "I'm feeling detuned today," I would know what they meant. They would feel they were feeling ill. Indeed, we still have that metaphor in our language, but it's a tuned engine. It's the opposite way around. We think of a tuned engine as being in good shape, a detuned engine as being in poor shape. And that metaphor is the one that underpins that quotation that which I'm now going to give in full. "Variable composition of man's body hath made it as an instrument easy to distemper, and therefore the poets did well to conjoin music and medicine in Apollo, because the office of medicine is but to tune the curious harp of man's body and reduce it to harmony." Isn't that a wonderful metaphor? So I think it's fantastic. So what I did was, think about that in the music, and so something you'll hear actually in some of the music is that I've played around with the tuning of the chords and the sounds to express that. So the first piece we're going to listen to, or part of, I should say, is a piece called Re-embodied, and it's an illness narrative. I'm just giving you some examples of illness narratives on the left-hand side. Some of you may know the book by Oliver Sacks, On a Leg to Stand On, where he talks about recovery, and part of as he recovers and gets back to the power of walking his legs, he talks himself about being re-embodied. This is on the right-hand side is a graph or picture of what an illness narrative might look like. It's from Olander's thesis on illness narratives in 19th century music, and she makes the argument that illness narratives have a different shape to them than regular narratives. They often result in this sort of spiral of decline, getting better, and then when you do finally hopefully get better, there's a new norm. So the piece we're going to listen to is a piece for instrumental ensemble. It's 11 different instruments, including a harp. And it's basically a series of episodes describing a young woman's life as she gets kidney failure in childhood, subsequently recovers from that, Then later in adolescence and early adulthood, she has a steady decline of chronic kidney function, and then she receives a kidney transplant from her mother. I'm not going to go through this is just technical stuff, but just to show that it's basically, the idea of this piece was to create a series of variations on two musical themes, one of which represents the daughter and the other one that represents the mother. And embedded within the music, which you won't be able to hear, I don't think, but it's there for a purpose, which is a little bit about the death of Mozart. So some of you may know that Mozart died of kidney failure. That is generally agreed. What's not agreed is what was the cause of his kidney failure. But there was at least one paper published suggesting it was hemangioma purpura, that he'd suffered in childhood and then went on to get chronic kidney disease later. And actually, the story is about a young woman who had that very same disease. So embedded within the music. And there's some fantastic descriptions of Mozart's, around the time of Mozart's death. He describes the feeling of, as he said, I had the taste of death in my mouth. Well, we've heard about pneumonia building up, causing a breath that's actually smelling of ammonia. I'm sure that's what he was talking about. His sister made him a special smock, which was so that he could sit up comfortably in bed. He was so swollen with edema, swelling and fluid, that he couldn't get on a proper shirt. So she made a special smock for him so that he could sit in bed and actually write the final pages of his Requiem. So we're going to go ahead. What I've done here is showing you a score video, which I appreciate not everybody in the room reads music, but along the bottom I'm hoping you'll see some sort of description of the music as it goes along, so that you can follow it, I hope, with some degree of... and I think probably what I have to do is to press here. So this is a few minutes. We join the piece halfway through when the girl has recovered from her acute kidney failure in childhood. She's now well, but then she starts to become less well in the first movement. We then have a movement that's about the mother actually coming to see me and talk about it, and how she wanted to give a kidney transplant. Then there's the actual development of the transplant, and then the recovery. That's great. Now lost the place. I should have said that that was performed by the Birmingham Contemporary Music Group, which is based in Birmingham. And that they work with composition students and workshop with music. The next piece of music is, I'm just going to play a much shorter excerpt. It's from a string quartet that I wrote, and it's really to try and perhaps, again, it's partly narrative and partly metaphor. Perhaps not surprising from, you know, what I'm interested in research is I got rather interested in water and fluid and all that sort of stuff. So it made a lot of sense to write about water in the context of this type of illness. And actually the whole string quartet's about different aspects of illness associated with water. But I'm going to just choose you one little excerpt, which is quite a tough listen, but the idea is that what you're hearing is an individual gradually developing more and more breathlessness associated with fluid excess or fluid overload. I show this bit of the score not because I want to spend too much time there, but basically to explain that throughout this little section, the string instruments play a phrase which is I call the breathing phrase, and it's this bit here in purple. This bit here, you'll hear that coming through. It gets a little faster and faster as the time goes by, as to get breathless. It's actually set, the bar length here is set specifically to reflect the respiratory cycle. So we know that the respiratory cycle is shorter when you breathe in and longer when you breathe out. What you cannot see in small writing is that I asked the string players when they were singing that particular phrase, playing that particular phrase, to breathe in time with the phrase. So they themselves, by very virtue playing the music, become more breathless during the course of the music. So this is my idea of trying to embody the music within the performance of the music. This is performed by the Ligeti String Quartet, which is a young quartet that do a lot of contemporary music. Great. Now, the final piece of music was going to be talking to you about the use of patient experience. So what I did was I went into the literature and looked up every paper I could find on qualitative research on the experience of thirst, because our patients get thirsty, as you know. And from that, I distilled a whole series of quotations, which I then put together as a lyric for this piece. if nothing else, that might be worth looking at. So this is the lyric that came out from this exercise. Can anyone of you read that? Maybe not. I think it's remarkably poignant, actually, when you read it through. I mean, I don't want you to read it all, but just get a feel for it. What I did was assemble the pieces of script, starting initially with the experience of description of the symptom, and then as we go through it, it becomes gradually more the existential feelings that they have associated with these feelings. I don't feel like I'm alive when I'm cut down on water. I get so tired, that sort of thing. And I've set this to music. So the music that underpins the lyrics, again, was inspired by thinking about water. And there is a very interesting culture called the Kaluli people, who actually use metaphor of water to talk about music. So they actually, when they're talking about how you write music and how you structure it, they use the metaphor of a waterfall. And I just thought this was perfect for what I was trying to achieve, because you can see here a phrase here, which is, you can almost see that as being visually descriptive of a waterfall. And they have these different words for it. So, for example, that bottom note there at the end of that phrase is that pool you get in a waterfall after the water's come down. You know, you often get a pool at the bottom where the water's still and more steady. And their music always comes from the top down. They write their music from high note going down to a low note, as waterfalls go. And they also always use the same pitch structure in that. So I've borrowed their pitch structure to create the notes in this section. And I think particularly in this example, you will hear what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the detuning. And this is the final thing. So this is one movement of a whole cantata. I'm afraid to say I've not yet found a choir that's willing to perform it. You can come and see me afterwards. if you know, it's difficult, that's why. So this is actually created using quite a sophisticated program, which is not bad, actually, in terms of what the music sounds like. So thanks for indulging me. Not the first audience to play the lecture. I played it to the music department, Birmingham. That was very interesting too. My thanks to those people who were involved. And if you really do want to go and listen to a bit more of this, and other music, which is a bit more cheerful, then of course you can go to the website. Great, thank you. So I think that draws our afternoon to a close.